So my blog was about the stay-at-home daughter, Christian patriarchy, and quiverful movements. They are three separate movements. They are not all one. The stay-at-home daughter movement was actually named in the early 2000s, but it has its start back with the Christian patriarchy movement in the mid to late 1980s, as does the quiverful movement, which I would say is more about the early to mid 90s. The Christian patriarchy movement is what it sounds like, but just to briefly explain, the movement believes that men are biologically and ordained by God to always be in charge, and specifically of women, thus the word patriarchy, and that women are always to obey men, wives to husbands, daughters to fathers and brothers, and husbands. Daughters are to live at home, obeying their fathers until such time as their father gives them to the man that they will marry, at which point in time they're supposed to then obey that husband instead. The quiverful movement, again, it's attached, it's not the same thing. Basically, this movement says that women should forego all contraception and abstaining from sex once they're married so that they can be open to getting pregnant as many times as is possible, and or raising those children in such a way that they then go out into what we consider to be regular society and they consider to be the world, and change the world to change this nation to be a Christian one with Christian laws, Christian politics, Christian businesses. Specifically, my blog was interviewing former stay-at-home daughters that had escaped. They do generally consider themselves to be escapees and or survivors, and you can probably see why, right? Stay-at-home daughters, generally speaking, it's not always true, but it is almost always true, are not allowed to go to college. The vast, vast, vast majority of them are homeschooled. I'm talking about like 98%. And they're homeschooled with Christian patriarchy specific curriculum. So they're not taught things like biology, science, math beyond your general grade school level, and thus have considerable problem-solving deficits. So for a stay-at-home daughter to actually get out is a huge challenge, but once they get out, they've seen something that they consider to be hurtful, challenging, painful, and dark, and they want to do something to make sure that other people understand it and potentially do something to change it so that situations like this can't keep happening to successive generations of girls and women in the US. So just in case I didn't mention this earlier, I just want to let you know that my blog was interviewing survivors and or escapees of the stay-at-home daughter movement. I specifically interviewed 4, and I ended up only writing about 2 because their stories were just so profound, so moving that it just took, and there was so much there that I felt compelled to write about, and sometimes just the silly nuances of their everyday life. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say silly, I just meant what a lot of people would consider trivial, like the day-to-day aspect of their lives. I did not find that to be trivial at all. As a matter of fact, I actually found that to be where the meat of the movement is, because I felt like it spoke to how these movements affect their very lives on a day-to-day basis. So obviously the goal of this blog and the course in general was to understand how what we were learning related to the individual level or our societal level of technology and networking. And on the individual level, obviously, there's professional and knowledge gathering. And on the societal level, we looked at how these things shape conflicts. And specific to this group, how this blog could help to shape the conflict by providing more information to either side that could help to facilitate, let's say, a better conversation, a more productive conversation. So obviously at the individual level, there is professional. And for me, there were two things that this blog brought up. And that was one, that to continue this sort of work, if you will, on a website that would be linked to a nonprofit so that the website could provide a toolkit of resources that women just escaping from the stay-at-home daughter movement or the Christian patriarchy movement or the quiver movement could utilize when they leave, understanding that these women are oftentimes at a technological disadvantage, though not always, and they are certainly at a huge disadvantage to understanding the resources that are available that we might take for granted because they're a part of our everyday lives. So that was one of the two things for me at the individual level. But the other one was a book that would sort of demystify the mythologies of these movements and importantly examine them in terms of cult research. And specifically, nowadays, cults are referred to amongst the academic community as high control, high order groups. And that probably is pretty obvious why. But to write a book that would take these practices, these actions, and analyze them in terms of the two primary frameworks that high control, high order groups utilize. And one is the BITE model, and the other one is the influence continuum. And both of these frameworks assist people in understanding what's referred to as undue influence. And so those are the frameworks that would be used to help people understand these groups that are on the outside. And the purpose for this would be so that we who are on the outside, we who are the society, if you will, can really actually do something in a positive way to potentially bring change to the life of the people that are inside. And that brings us to the sort of second major theoretical concept of the course. So at the societal level, I feel like both of these projects from the personal level sort of come together to create something, or have the potential to come together to create something that could be quite helpful for all of us. Not just for the people who are leaving, but for those of us who are on the outside that have loved ones that are still inside. And so at the societal level, first of all, you would have that toolkit on the website so that people had resources to use, whether those are domestic violence shelters or safe houses, whether that's information on how to get a birth certificate or a social security number. Believe me, that can be a huge problem. Or even if it's just a link to a mental health counselor. And I shouldn't say just a link, because that would be huge. Mental health and often medical isn't utilized inside these movements. But for those of us on the outside, the blog and resources and the knowledge that's collected through the survivor stories, through the website, freedomofmind.com, helps us to not just understand why people left, but how we can talk to people still inside. And now, once you have them questioning, now you have the situation where they very well might feel that the day-to-day pain of living in a movement like this is not worth the trade-off. And again, that's where a resource like freedomofmind.com comes into play, where survivor stories comes into play, and then of course other resources, domestic violence shelters, crisis text hotlines, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. All of these sort of pieces of knowledge coming together, people who have gotten out, telling their story, networking together in such a way so that we are providing both the people on the inside and those of us on the outside with knowledge that then has the potential to change the conversation and alter the outcome of the conflict. Thank you.